Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road Podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean, and for today's show, we are going to be talking about Robert the doll, the supposedly haunted doll that is now located in a museum in Key West, Florida. But before we get started with today's show, if you would like to be on the show or would like to submit your stories to us, like one of our listeners did, if you listen to episode 58, we read Connor's stories that he provided to us. And we had a blast doing it, and we encourage folks to send us their stories, or if you would like to come on the show as a guest and share the story yourself, we would love to have you on. If you would like to do so, you can reach us at our email address of twroadpodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on one of our many social media platforms of TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Reach out to us, and we'd love to hear from you and love to have a conversation with you. And with that, we'll start today's show. We were kind of going a little back and forth on what to cover today, and we landed on the interesting case of Robert the doll.
Yeah, so this is one where I had heard a little bit of in the past and just reading about it briefly. There are so many interesting aspects to the story. And I'm going to shoot out the most eye-popping one to me right away. Apparently, there is a website that is run by a specific company in Key West who does like haunted tours and stuff. But they claim that Robert the doll is actually the one and only inspiration behind the slasher film Child's Play, which if you're not familiar with Child's Play, likely you are, but it's basically the movie with Chucky the doll. We've seen so many iterations and different versions of this movie come out, but the original was essentially a murderer gets executed. If I remember correctly, I haven't seen it forever, but a murderer gets executed during a lightning storm, and then he gets transported, his soul gets transported into this child's doll, which is very popular, and essentially the doll goes on a killing spree. That was a really insane movie that I grew up with, and it really scared and freaked the shit out of me as a kid. I don't know about you, but that just adds an extra degree of insanity and creepiness to this particular story, because that'll always be in my head. But the last thing I'll say as a prep for this, we can talk about the background and stuff, but the other thing that I wanted to mention is that this doll apparently was, given to a child who was relatively well off his family in 1904. So this is an old story. This took place in the early 1900s, and that really sets the picture for what we're about to talk about, because there are a lot of things that have happened over the years that are related to this doll. And the doll itself is still in Key West, Florida. You can go visit yourself. You can go right up to it. And the last thing they say as a warning is don't take a picture of the doll, because you're going to get some serious bad luck. And I can kind of see why they would say that, because I'm looking at pictures of the doll online, and it is creepy as shit. For listeners, if you cannot look it up by yourself right now, I'll describe it. It's about 3 foot tall, it seems like. And so it's not small by any means. It's a really life-size looking doll, probably the size of a toddler. It was actually created by a German company called Steiff Company, which is known for making all kinds of different dolls, usually soldier dolls. I see a lot about, soldier dolls from like World War I and stuff like that, wearing the old military garb. But Robert the doll is actually wearing a sailor's uniform, or like a sailor's outfit. And we came to find out that was not the original uniform that he was sold in or created in. That was actually worn by the child at one point, who received the doll as a gift. So if you're seeing the doll to this day wearing the sailor uniform, that was once worn by its owner. He went by Gene, but his full name was Robert Eugene Otto, born in 1900. So he was 4 years old when he got the doll. And I'll flip it back over to you to add anything that I might have missed out on.
Yeah, I think one thing that we came across about the origin story was that the doll was gifted to Jean by a Bahamian servant that was supposedly mistreated by the family. Correct me if I'm wrong. The claim was that the Bahamian servant like practiced dark magic or something like that,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
cast a spell on the doll, and then gave it to the kid. And maybe that explains why Jean was so attached to this doll, and maybe why this doll has such a bad rap and is associated with some paranormal instances. And I'm glad you brought up Child's Play, because I always initially thought that the Child's Play Chucky movie was based off of the Annabelle doll, but I was wrong. It's based off of Robert the doll. So, like you said, there are two origin stories: that it was manufactured by the Steiff Company of Germany, known for their high quality stuffed animals, which was gifted to Jean in 1904, which I believe was by his grandfather that took a trip to Germany, or it was gifted by a pissed off servant that practiced dark magic. I think the pissed off servant that practiced dark magic is the more fun theory to go down.
I also kind of want the Steiff Company to like reach out to us, and like they're going to be our first sponsors. But like it's funny because like no one, they're still around, but like no one has heard of Steiff Company. It's like, so we're over here like in the US, Steiff Company, a German model company, like a German toy company. And
Right.
I know it's not gonna. It's that I would probably never do that anyway. But
Dude, what if they like send us life-size copies of Robert?
okay. Yeah, like you said, you told me you're like you're giving Chris was giving me a warning before we got on. He's like, okay, dude, I don't know if I want to do this because there's it's saying that we're not supposed to look at pictures or take pictures of Robert the doll. And he's like, because it causes insane bad luck. And I was like, dude, if my luck could get any fucking worse right now, I highly doubt a doll's gonna do it. So bring it, send me all the dolls. My luck's already shit.
Right.
I'll take the hit.
Yeah. Maybe we should set up a P.O. box for people to send us haunted dolls. Who knows? I'll set up the P.O. box in Hawaii. You can go. I don't
maybe so much bad luck and like evil will like negate itself at some point. So maybe if you get like like the 101st negative or like evil doll you get, then it'll just flip to positive and you just keep it that equilibrium.
We'll get so many dolls it'll be like that doll island in like Central or South America, whatever that is.
Oh my god, I forgot about that.
Yeah, we got to talk about that one day. That has to be a topic of discussion.
Absolutely. Yeah, something you said that I wanted to address is, so the concept that it was either Robert the doll was either created and given by a voodoo practitioner who was smited or slighted by the family, or that it was just created as like one of thousands of children's toys by the Steiff Germany company. But the crazy thing is, like, whatever one of those stories is true, I like to look at the origin of the doll itself, which is like I asked the question, what imbibed the doll with an evil spirit? Because apparently what happened next when the doll came to the house, regardless of what the origin story was, it started exhibiting strange behavior. And what was going on was little Jean at 4 years old would be playing with this life-size doll in his room, and his family, probably well-to-do. I mean, it sounds like they weren't poor. I mean, they weren't exactly the richest people ever, but it sounds like they were pretty well off. So I don't know why they would want to make up such these story like this in the society that they lived in back in the day in the 1900s. But they claimed that Jean would be playing with the doll behind closed doors, and they could hear Jean occasionally verbally engaging with the doll, with Robert the doll. And occasionally they would hear a different voice responding back to Jean talking to Robert the doll. And I think that is, in and of itself, that's like the first creepy crux of the story, where you have some paranormal activity that isn't being seen, but you're also having it being experienced by a child who doesn't know how to articulate this sort of thing. So I don't know. What's your take on that? Like, what do you think? Is there anything I missed to that part of the story? And what pops out to you as interesting about that?
I think the thing you started touching on was that he's always playing with the dolls. And I think that's a bit of an understatement. This kid, Gene, was obsessed with Robert the doll. He took it everywhere. Wherever they went, it got even to the point where he got older, he like set up a room for Robert the doll in the attic. But like you said, like weird things started happening. And servants and family members and neighbors reported that they heard the doll giggle and saw it speak with a voice distinctly different from Gene's. So it wasn't Gene, apparently. You know how like when you're little and you're playing with toys, and like for example, when I was little, I had a shit ton of X-Men and Wolverine toys and Ninja Turtle toys, and I pick up my Wolverine toy, and you're like, "It's your last day, punk!" And
You fucking asshole! I'll slice you.
right, like I'm gonna kick your ass, Cyclops, and you're doing these little voices for these characters, and it's they're not the best. Like they're still distinct. You can tell that, you know, it's kind of a different voice, but it's your kid doing these voices. Whereas in this situation, he's playing with Robert the doll, and the servants and family members are looking at them playing, and he's like, why does this fucking doll have a voice? This kid is not making this voice. Like, what the fuck is going on here? Here's the thing. You have a little kid. You have a fairly young child. In this story, when things went wrong or were misplaced in the house, Gene's explanation was always the same. Blamed it on Robert. The phrase became a regular explanation for any mishap in the house, regardless of its nature. Now, you, sir, as a father of a 3 or 4-year-old child, is that the case? Is something blamed whenever they do something wrong? Do they blame it on some sort of stuffed animal or find some reason?
No, luckily, I mean, we've caught my daughter telling fibs. We say fibs because they're really innocent. It's like, you know, who ate that cookie? Did you eat it? No. And then we have proof you ate it. And then she's like, okay, I ate it. But
it's not like she's flipping furniture.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like she's making up stories like her dolls did stuff yet. But, you know, the life is young. We'll see where it goes after that. I've heard crazy stories when you have kids about. I am waiting for that moment when like she starts reporting on seeing something, like going upstairs and playing with some. But then again, it's just like, come on, like how they're like 9 out of 10 times if a kid is talking about playing with somebody that is invisible, it's just, what do you call it? An imaginary friend. And,
Yeah.
Or, you know, something like they saw on TV, they're just pretending something. And so I don't really pay a lot of homage or like attention to that sort of thing yet. But I'll say in this story, so here's one thing that I have to say in criticism to the story. So I did confirm, as you were talking, going deeper into the research, that this kid did grow up in a very well-to-do family. They had a Victorian mansion. They were respected by the community. So then you have two sides to the coin here. You have a family that is well-respected, and they have these weird things going on that people who are not within their immediate sphere are reporting. People hearing voices from the doll. Even a gentleman, we'll get to this eventually, but a gentleman seeing the doll walk from window to window. So you have that side of the story. So in my mind, if it's coming from the perspective of the wealthy, the well-to-do family, the parents and stuff, they would probably want to protect that image and their wealth from the society immediately around them. So I can see where they would want to fabricate something. If they had a child who was having emotional trouble, or like something that they found particularly embarrassing, like about the kid is like became, you know, like you said, he became obsessed with the doll at one point. So maybe they thought that, oh, he has a mental issue. But then if that were true, they would probably have gotten rid of the doll long ago. Before they even let it get that bad. So that, I think that kind of ticks the favor back towards, you know, something strange going on. So if you have a wealthy, well-to-do family and they're not throwing away the doll, then it's possible that they do have some kind of belief that something strange is going on here and they're afraid of what's going to happen. Or maybe they just don't want to pay attention to it at all. But the last thing
if I may
you're going to say that?
If I may
please.
interject, I would say the only reason, not trying to steal your thunder, I just had to get it out. The only reason I can think of for them not getting rid of the doll is because if you're from a well-to-do family, your parents are probably entrenched with business every single fucking day.
Yeah.
It's all about keeping the money flowing in. That's why they have servants. That's why they have nannies. And they're paying people to do the jobs that parents should do in this situation. So the servant is not going to fucking take the doll and toss it away, right? I could picture this scenario in my head because, it's something that one point or another has happened to a child that had a paranormal experience, or someone watching a child that has had a paranormal experience while taking care of that child. You go and you report it, and it's like, oh, it's nothing. It's just your imagination. It's nothing important. Like, I don't have time for this. I could easily picture his parents, specifically his father, because if you consider the early 1900s, the familial system, it's very traditional, it's very rigid. His dad's probably going to be like, I don't fucking have time for this shit. Let him play with the doll. I have stuff to do. I have wealth to maintain. I have business deals to take care of to make sure that the wealth of this family continues to prosper. So please, by all means, leave me the fuck alone. Let him do what he wants. And I wouldn't be surprised if that was the answer.
I'm with you, man. I think that's a really brilliant perspective. And I don't want to like pump the brakes too hard on this, but I have to ask you before we get any deeper into the stories and stuff, when you hear stories like this, because you said, like, as you said, you have experience with, strange things happening. I don't really have that. I have a couple of stories that, you listen back to our podcast. I have some strange things happening in my life, but I think my level of experience is relatively average or even sub-average to what a lot of people experience. And we're sitting here with Mr. Chris, who legitimately has some crazy stories to talk about. But so if I turn the attention back to you, Chris, like what would you say in the situation, in your wildest dreams or your wildest imagination? What is possessing Robert the doll? Let's put aside the idea that it was, we don't know for a fact if there was a servant from the Bahamas who was poorly treated by the family and he participated in voodoo or practiced voodoo and cursed the doll. Let's put that to the side. But let's just say hypothetically, like, something is inhabiting this doll and it's doing strange things. And it doesn't seem like so far the story is kind of going towards violence or anything that's really harming the family. It's just like, something that is innocuous. It doesn't really seem like it's hurting anybody. It's just kind of being paranormal. So maybe it's like a tulpa where the child has some kind of power to give to the doll to make it alive at some point or another. It does seem like Eugene had siblings. He had at least one older brother. I don't know how much older he was, but it seems like he was quite a bit older based off of some of the tidbits and excerpts that I've been reading. So I don't know. Does that factor into everything you're saying? I mean, he had a couple. It said that he had a couple siblings. It doesn't say how many more, but it says he had one brother. So I assume that that means if there were more siblings, he had at least one sister as well. But it sounds like he was one of the youngest, if not the youngest in the family.
Yeah. So let me start off with the logical answer. Let's say, like, his siblings are older than him. They're probably entrenched in their own lives, doing their own thing. So they probably won't really pay attention to him. Me being an older brother, that was very much the case. Like, my sister is 5 years younger than me. And I remember when I was like 15, she was 10. I had no interest in what she was doing, what she was playing with, or who her friends were, or what they decided to do. Like, I literally didn't care because I was involved in my own life and my own friends, etc. So I can see
rich asshole.
And let's talk about his
wealthy asshole. Sorry, man.
I wish I was. Let's talk about his parents. Like we said, they're a well-to-do family, so they're probably going to dinner parties, galas, all this different stuff. His dad was probably entrenched with business. His mom was probably entrenched in the social circle with all the other wealthy women and other folks within that society at the time. So they're probably really not going to pay attention to their kid, and that's why they have servants and stuff like that to do that for them. And I could see a situation, and this is the logical side, in which this kid got attached to this doll because that's the only thing he was around. That's the one thing that he could love, and it could conceivably love him back because it's an inanimate object. It's not going to go anywhere unless it's physically taken from him. So he could have developed such an infatuation with this doll that it just got to the point where it was just part of him, and he couldn't live without it.
That's really insightful. I'm 100% on the same page as you. I think that if there was anything happening in the situation, even if the doll did eventually get some kind of like attachment to it that made strange things happen, it seemed to have started with Gene and his interactions and his belief, which kind of gives some credibility to the idea that it could be a tulpa, like we talked about before. Which, if you're not familiar, like a tulpa in the smallest nutshell imaginable, you can just say that you focus so much on something becoming reality, even if it's not true at that given moment, even if it's not factual, that you actually will it into existence. So we've talked about this for a long time, many topics. We've spoke about children, and even the people we talk to who have their own stories about strange occurrences and supernatural stuff, paranormal stuff, they seem to have more stories as children. So this is just another drop in the bucket about how it's possible that a child could give some kind of life to something that didn't originally have life, or have some connection to the other side that otherwise wouldn't have been made without that level of influence at that age. But here's an interesting thing. I'll just mention it now because we don't have to get into it. We could talk about it later because there's still more to talk about with this doll. But imagine in this situation where the doll really was just a doll. And even all the experiences that people reported about the doll, like hearing voices from it, seeing it get up and walk around from window to window, whatever you want to bring up from this story. But imagine a situation where Gene gets older, like he lived, like he wasn't killed by this doll. He actually grew up to be an adult, right? So imagine a situation where he gets old enough and maybe even passes away, and then all of these strange occurrences that have happened were retroactively applied to the doll itself. So like nowadays, people report the doll, which is still very much sitting in a case in Key West. Like we said in the beginning, you can go visit it. People report there's strange interferences with electronics, and the security cameras get buggy from time to time. Again, these things are, could be explained by a million other things. But if you want to believe that there's some kind of paranormal activity going on, who's to say that the doll wasn't just a doll for most of its existence? Maybe after Gene died, he believed so much in the doll that his spirit ended up being the one to possess it and then have these strange occurrences happen. So that's an interesting aspect that we haven't talked about before, right?
So one thing I wanted to say about that is that going down the paranormal route, it seems like these weird things were happening while Gene was still alive, especially when he was a kid. With, like you said, some people saw that, from the window, it would move from window to window and there would be nobody home and stuff like that. But I wanted to touch on the paranormal aspect, the potential paranormal aspect. Let's say the theory that it was cursed happened. So that's self-explanatory. Something was attached to it before it was given to him, and it manipulated him, and it, made him infatuated with the doll, saying like, thinking that it's its only friend, yada, yada, right? But let's say that before Gene, now this is just my paranormal speculation. Let's say that before Gene got the doll, he was already talking with an imaginary friend. And now in comes the doll, in which this imaginary friend has a vessel to occupy and be a source of paranormal activity, a more localized source. And maybe that explains why even later on in life, he was so attached to this doll. Because as Gene got older, he did inherit his family home as an adult. He did get married. He and his wife Anne moved in. And what's interesting is that his wife was very uncomfortable with the whole Robert the doll situation, to the point where Gene insisted on giving the doll a room of its own, where it was set up with furniture and toys. The room where Robert the doll stayed is said to have become a source of eerie occurrences. And like we said before, people passing by the house reported seeing the doll move from window to window. Sometimes when Jean was at home, Robert would sit in a chair by the upstairs window where school children reported it would watch them pass by.
First of all, let me say, you and I coming up with these speculations about what's possible, I think we should probably be writers. Before AI takes over, we should become writers, or at least, like attachments for writers, for someone writing a good story, because we keep coming up with all these different ideas that like you come up with an awesome idea and I come up with an idea and it's like, holy shit, like this could be a movie. Like you could literally make I know Chucky the Doll was a movie, but like this movie in and of itself, like I've never seen it done cinematically, and I think that it would be such a creepy concept to have like a kid who has a doll and you don't really know if the doll's possessed throughout the beginning of the movie, but then he goes off to like become an artist and gets married, and then he comes back and then he has this like crazy infatuation with the doll that gets worse and worse, and his wife notices from her perspective, and then eventually like it comes out that he's insane or something like that. That's what I think of when I hear this story, but I know there's more paranormal instances going on than just someone who's potentially has mental issues. But I will say the next part of the story that I was waiting for you to get to, like I thought that it was going to transition to this, but this is a good time to mention that eventually Gene and his wife did pass on. I don't think, it doesn't seem, I'm going to look like an asshole probably because, if you're listening, you could do your own research. We won't pause to do it real quick, but like, I don't think they had any kids. It seems like what happened next is Gene, who became the artist as an adult, died in 1974. Somebody placed, or I think his wife placed it on the market, who, she was still alive at the time. She was very old, but she placed it on the market, and it was eventually purchased by a woman named Myrtle Reuter. And here's the craziest part of the story so far for me. This doll that had so much paranormal activity associated with it by, reported by so many people, it was found by Myrtle in the attic of this old house that was sold to her, hidden. Not just like lying out in the open. It was like it was tucked away and hidden after she started hearing strange noises in the attic. So this is like the point of the story where there's like an apex, right? It's like either Myrtle Reuter is full of shit and she knew exactly all about Robert the doll before she bought the house and like, the association between the people. Either that's the case and she made this up to get attention, or I guess there's a third possibility where like she heard like, animals messing around up there, like squirrels getting into, mice or rats or whatever getting into her attic, and then she just happened to find the doll. But I think that the fact that she found the doll after she heard strange noises in the attic perpetually for a while, that's enough to kind of give me some shivers about this story. And I don't easily get shivers about this sort of thing.
And even like you said, after Gene passed, his wife moved out the house, leaving Robert behind. Multiple owners of that home experienced bizarre incidents. And that's when Robert ended up in the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West.
Yeah, but, and we should say in 1994. So that's not a short amount of time, right? That's at least 2 decades, almost 2 decades worth. Actually, sorry, exactly 2 decades worth of people having interactions with Robert the doll after Gene died. And people also equally report strange occurrences associated with this doll before it was moved to the museum in 94.
Okay, I know we kind of jumped ahead with Gene dying, his wife moving out, and other people encountering that live in that home, owners of that home, that started encountering issues with Robert the doll, and then it ended up in a museum in Key West. But I did want to pull it back a little bit and go back to some of the paranormal incidents over the year that contributed to Robert the doll's reputation of being one of the most haunted objects in the world. Early on, we did talk about people hearing voices. So voices and giggles. Family members and servants in the Otto household frequently heard Gene conversing with Robert. It was said that responses in a completely different voice were heard. Many also reported hearing the doll giggle menacingly. Numerous witnesses, including neighbors, visitors, claimed to have seen Robert move on his own. He was often reported to change positions within the room or even move from one room to another when no one was near him. And I'm assuming that was in the same room. Could you imagine that you have this doll? Your daughter has a doll, and you know you left it in her room, and you guys are gone for a day or two. You open your door, you walk into your door, and it's just like sitting like on your couch, just staring at the door. When you know damn fucking well you left it in the room and shut the door.
Man, dude, I am so glad you brought up that question in this part of the story, because this is the fun thing about having a kid. Your life is just blurring past you, you know, with all of your responsibilities, like work and like house shit, and like also like trying to stay on top of doing a good job taking care of your child, etc. But I am having a flood of experiences rush back to me about things. I know I can hear people listening like, oh, how convenient. Like, you were talking about dogs. No, I'm serious, man. Like, listen, I'm going to show Chris something and the people can't see it, but it's not really that creepy. It's actually kind of cute and modern. But Chris, what do you think? I'm going to show Chris, and he's going to like have a seizure. He's going to be like, this doll. Who is this? Who am I showing you?
Oh, that's Princess Peach.
Princess Peach. Do you know where I got this? I got this in Japan. Yes, yeah. Actually, we went to Universal Studios, or sorry, was it Universal? Yeah, it's in Universal Studios, I think.
Oh, you went to the Mario World.
Yeah, and nothing crazy about it, right? It's just like, it's a modern character, and it's relatively new. It was probably made like a year ago. But I had this weird thing happen with this doll, even just like a week ago, I think. I almost said a few nights, but I'm pretty sure it was a week ago. And if you're not a parent, just know that time doesn't exist anymore when you have a child. Like, you try to remember things that happened, and like, oh, did that happen 2 days ago? No, that was 2 weeks ago. So this doll was laying like any other day in the corner of the room. And I think I was either getting my daughter ready for bed, or I was by myself in the morning or something. It was somewhere around like the twilight, or the like the early or late hours. And I turned my head, and I swear this doll's eyes were looking like, so she was laying on her back facing away from me, but still like her head was facing my direction, like on her back, this doll. And I swear the eyes were looking in my direction from the bottom left, which, if you can't, you haven't seen the doll is looking straight ahead. So if you like, Chris is looking, like she's looking right at you. And I'm going to show Chris, I swear she was looking at me from the bottom of her eyes as she was laying like this. And as soon as I locked eyes on her, it went back to normal. And that is such the stupidest shit ever, right? Because this is literally stitching. This is stitching. Stitching doesn't just suddenly move, right? So it was probably my insane brain playing tricks on me. But that's just something worth mentioning, isn't it? That like something like that can either play tricks on you, or there's something going on. And then, like, one last thing I want to tell you that is even more surreal that happened to me. So I was going for a jog one Halloween time, like a few years ago, and somebody, like, if you haven't been to Hawaii, just know that people do holidays right in Hawaii because they have so many decorations. It's insane the amount that people spend on decorations here. I literally ran past a witch's cauldron with 3 witches around it that were life-size, actual, physically, like, crazy, scary looking witches, right? Standing around the cauldron. Like, they were literally mannequins with like glassy eyes. They looked so real. And as I ran past one in the early morning, it was still very early, kind of still dark out. I swear, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of them shift their eyes and look at me as I ran past, and it watched me go by, and then it shifted back to normal. And I usually run like 3 or 4 times a week. For like a whole month while they saw the decorations out, I ran past it just to see if I could replicate that. And I could never replicate one of those witches looking at me the same way out of the corner of my eye. And that's probably the most surreal doll experience I've ever had, because it was just so creepy, the timing. Dude, you can cut this out. I probably went on a tangent too much. But I don't think I ever told you that story. It was really creepy.
No, that is creepy. I mean, it's relevant to the doll stuff, so no, I'm not going to cut that out.
Have you ever had any weird experiences with dolls now that we mention it?
Not with dolls, but okay. Here's the thing. My mom being Dominican, her family likes to collect these like statues. They're faceless. They're faceless statues. But they're just so creepy. And my older family members, like older aunts and stuff, and maybe folks that have already passed on, they would have cabinets full of like dolls and stuff. Or,
Why?
people that will have paintings, like portraits and whatnot. And when you walk by one at night, you feel like the eyes are following you. Now, I don't know if that's a legitimate phenomenon that humans do, like, have mentally where we do that to ourselves. But dude, some fucking times we're either going crazy or those eyes are actually following us because it's so freaking creepy. And okay, I know I'm going a little off topic, but around where I live, there's an antique shop. And when my sister was in town, I think this was a year ago in May for her birthday, my wife and her like to go to antique shops. So we decided to go there. We go to one section of the antique shop, and on the wall, once you walk in through one of the rooms and you turn left, there's a big painting of this like guy. There's a sign on it that says haunted portrait. And the entire time we were there, like it felt like the eyes were just following you. And oddly enough, that same around that same time, my sister stayed with us for probably 3 or 4 weeks. One of the weekends, we had to drive to the other side of Pennsylvania, a friend's kid's, I think it was first or second birthday.
Was it like closer to Philly or like Lancaster area or like what part
like northeast Pennsylvania. We leave on the Friday, we come back on the Sunday. My sister said on the Saturday night, where she's sleeping here in the room where we're recording right now, she woke up with a bout of sleep paralysis. And what's crazy is that the cats sleep with her as well. She like woke up, she shifted her, like she's looking around. She sees the cat sitting right next to her, staring at the doorway. And she sees the picture of whatever that was in that portrait, like the head of that person just like floating there. And she's like, the only reason I know I was awake is because the cats kind of like formed like a guard line on the bed.
Okay.
Yeah. With her throughout the night. And they wouldn't leave. But that she said that night, all 3 of them stayed with her. And she said the only thing that kept her, I guess, like it was getting closer and closer to her. I don't know if she was like awake in a dream state or something of that sort. I'm not invalidating what she went through. But she said like she said a prayer in her head. Like she had to say it multiple times. And then like she was able to like move and it kind of like dissipated away. It was really fucking creepy. And she's like, there was a couple of things that happened that day that I didn't want to tell you and creep you out. She said that, so in the doorway, she had like the gate up and one of my dogs, well, both dogs stayed with her as well in the room. That earlier that night, she heard my voice call my dog's name, one of their names. And he jumps off the bed and he's like whining at the gate and fucking creepy. But I think it's still relevant to the conversation because we're talking about an inanimate object having some sort of influence on somebody. But I think, what you said about encountering with the mannequins, and, feeling like the eyes are following you and, the eyes of the Peach doll kind of looking at you while it's laying down face up. I don't think you're alone in that, dude. And I don't know if it's our minds playing tricks on us because it's kind of like, I guess, that uncanny valley type of thing where it's kind of close to human, but it's not. So you expect it to have some sort of, human mannerisms. But it's nonetheless, whether it's our mind playing tricks on us or not, it's still fucking creepy. We can get back to the Robert the Doll experiences. So back to good old Robert the doll here. So guests and family members reported seeing Robert's expressions change, particularly if someone made a negative comment about Jean or the household. His expression was said to turn from neutral to menacing. Also, objects around the Otto home would often be found thrown across the room, furniture overturned, and other signs of disturbances, all attributed to Robert when no one else was near. When Robert was moved to the attic, it was said that his footsteps could be heard scurrying about despite the attic being empty and locked. Now we're going to segue into a couple of experiences that has happened at the museum. So at the Fort East Martello Museum, where Robert is currently housed, visitors and staff have reported their electronic devices suddenly malfunctioning. Cameras, particularly, cease to work or malfunction when pointed at or near Robert. Visitors who have photographed Robert without permission or who mocked him have reported experiencing a streak of bad luck. There are numerous letters at the museum from previous visitors apologizing to Robert for disrespecting him in hopes of lifting the curse. What do you think about that?
So the first thing that pops out, actually the most interesting thing to me, I'll say, is you're mentioning that some people reported the doll's mannerisms and even facial structure changing depending on what they felt the mood was like. So some people reported being happy and then suddenly seeing a grimace or look evil. If you actually look this, you can actually look this up yourself if you want to. If you're listening, go to Google Images and just literally just type in Robert the doll. And there are tons of images of this doll. But here's what I think is kind of pulling away from the paranormal aspect in that part of the story about how people report it grimacing at some times and smiling at other times. If you look at different angles of the doll, it just the way it is sewn together, I can see how people can imagine that looking down on it from one angle. Like I'm looking at a picture of it, looks pissed off as shit. It looks like its eyebrows are grimacing or looking down or angled down like he's angry. But then there's another picture of him looking underneath, like from the bottom up towards his chin, and he looks like he's smiling. I think it's just an unfortunate circumstance of like the angle and how it's sewed. That's the first thing. I mean, honestly, I'm just being completely honest. I think that's just something worth mentioning. But the other aspects to the story that you're mentioning, that's something that is less likely to be misconstrued by so many people, especially when it comes to like paranormal activity or weird camera disturbances or electronic disturbances happening at the actual museum. I guess it would all depend on, like, I've been to Key West a few times, and especially after a hurricane hit, it's really beaten down, and like it's not a good place to be whenever a storm is coming through. So I don't know how spotty electronics are in that area to begin with, but if so many people were reporting it, and the doll has been there for so many years and it just keeps happening over and over again, I think that gives a little bit extra credibility for me. Not a whole lot, but just a little bit more towards something strange going on as it's still sitting there in its case to this day. Did you Google it? Did you see what I'm saying? Like there's angles where you're looking down on it and he looks like pissed off.
Yeah, dude, I looked up pictures of the doll as well, and I can see how like at different angles and whatnot, it can look. I mean, the doll looks creepy in general. I'll put it this way: it looks creepy in general, but I can see if you're looking at it from different angles, like you said, how it could look menacing or anything of that sort. You know, it's funny. I came across a metro.co.uk article apparently with Ozzy Osbourne claims that his year of bad luck is down to a creepy doll named Robert.
What? Ozzy Osbourne?
Yeah. Apparently his son has this show where he tries to bring paranormal evidence to Ozzy and his mom. And I guess in one of the episodes, they like insult Robert the doll. I don't know in this episode if like they actually had the doll, but apparently they said that Ozzy threw the doll on the ground, and his wife threatened that they're going to give Robert to the dogs. And ever since then, Ozzy had a string of problems with his health over that past year. I think it was in, in 2020, but I think it has more to do with his lifestyle as a rock star.
I know.
Yeah.
I just to be clear to everybody, I wasn't laughing at the the poor state of Ozzy Osbourne. I'm not laughing at his plight. I'm laughing at the fact that he said that it was because of a doll, when in reality he's done drugs for like 25 solid years. It's like, you really want to blame the doll? You're like, that's really what pushed you over the edge? I mean, I'm not okay. I don't want to. I'm going to get some hate mail, but like. Anyway, I just thought that was funny.
I just thought that was a fun little fact that I found. And I think the name of the show is The Osbournes Want to Believe. So I think there might be a Robert.
Let's get him on. Let's get him on the show, man. Let's get him scheduled.
Dude, I wish.
It'll just be Ozzy calling us twats for like 5 hours. You fucking
be like, what the fuck are you talking about? None of this shit is real. It'll be funny to get him on to talk about Robert the doll. But I thought that was funny. That, you know, like Ozzy Osbourne is
I didn't expect that.
Somehow tied to this doll.
Like, yeah, exactly. To this day, I didn't even know that they had a show like that, which is kind of interesting. It's similar to, it kind of sounds like what we're doing, but like poorer and like less organized, where it's like, you know, they're just shitting. Well, at least from my perspective, like I'm trying to like debunk a lot of this stuff, and it sounds like that's what they're doing. They're being asked, but they're being more so assholes to these sort of things, which is maybe not the smartest thing. Because even me, like I know, like I've said this before, I know nothing, right? So Socratic idea, like I don't know anything. So even though I'm skeptical. I try to remain an air of respectability, because I don't know for sure if this stuff exists. So I'm not trying to invite the negative stuff to it. Anyway, yeah.
No, that is true. And the museum does have Robert locked in a displaying glass case. Apparently, visitors that come to the museum and staff have noticed different moods on Robert's face, which seem unexplainable. People often report feeling uneasy or chilled when near Robert. Some described a strong sensation of being watched or not being alone, even when there was no one else in the room. And also, the museum receives letters of apology from all over the world addressed to Robert, either asking for his forgiveness to ward off misfortune or thanking him for not cursing them after their visit, indicating a widespread belief in his powers and influence. And what's interesting is I came across this website called ghostkeywest.com, and they have a section on Robert the doll. So the URL is ghostkeywest.com /Robert the doll /. And it kind of gives like a quick rundown of who Robert the doll is, whether it's really haunted, where does it currently reside, if Robert the doll gives permission. I'm not sure permission for what, but apparently they say here Robert does not give permission. This is an often repeated legend that has no basis. In fact, people who experience problems with Robert are usually disrespectful. Asking for permission from an entity is a bad idea. Another section that says, does Robert the doll curse you? People who disrespect Robert the doll report days, weeks, or months of mechanical problems, accidents, strange occurrences, and misfortune. Some people end up with lost luggage. Others report being struck by lightning. And this was this is
just
an
Key
interesting
West.
one. I know, just Key West. It's just Florida. One little tab that they have is called, does Robert the doll kill? And they write, though it is rare for a death to be attributed to Robert the doll, it has happened. A Key West ghost tour guide had the image of Robert the doll tattooed on his arm and died shortly after it was completed.
What does it say? What he died of?
No, it doesn't say. It just said that he died.
He died of an artillery shell to the face because he was
An
in war.
artillery shell. The last few tabs, one of them says, "Why does everyone say sorry to Robert the doll?" The trend of hashtag sorry Robert evolved from the false belief that Robert the doll does not like to have its picture taken, and that you must ask permission before looking at his photo. Well, if we need permission, we're sorry,
We're
Robert,
fucked.
because we looked at your photo. And is Chucky based on Robert the doll? We were wrong earlier. No.
What?
Robert was around long before Chucky, but Chucky was based on the My Buddy doll.
Wait, the My Buddy doll was real? Because in the movie, the doll was called like Buddy doll or something like that? What is My Buddy doll?
No, it's real. It kind of looks like Chucky the doll.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
yep. It looks like Chucky, but with some minor variations on that.
We should do a like a sound piece in the show where we just do this thing where we interject where it's like asshole and then like a stamp sound like congratulations, you're an asshole. And it's just like you got your shit wrong too many times. We kept harping that it was based on this doll, and then like you found something that completely negated that.
No, that's called being responsible. It is what it is.
By the way, I was talking about me being the asshole, not you. I'm saying like, me being so sure that Chucky was based off of Robert the doll, and like getting shit wrong during this whole episode. Oh man.
Now it happens. So what's interesting, it says, "Where do I send a letter to Robert the doll? Send apologies, well wishes, and other letters to Robert at Robert the Doll, 3501 South Roosevelt Boulevard, Key West, Florida, 33040. So that is the address of the location where Robert the Doll is housed. And if you want to see Robert the Doll, you can see him at the Fort East Martello Museum. Do it at your own risk. I am not telling anyone to go and see Robert the Doll because I don't plan on going to see Robert the Doll. That's not something I have in mind.
What if I bought you a plane ticket to Key West? Would you go see it with me then?
Fuck no. well, with you?
Yeah.
To go see Robert the Doll with you?
Yeah, man. I'll protect you.
Fine. As long as we don't take any pictures.
Okay.
I ain't taking no damn pictures with that doll. How shitty would that be? Like our podcast starts taking off, we take a picture with Robert the Doll, and it just all goes to shit. Oh, that would.
Joke's on him. It's already shit.
Oh, come on. We're not that bad.
No. We're bad.
All right, man. So what's your final word on Robert the Doll? You think there's some actual paranormal stuff going on here? Or do you think it's some kid that got so attached to a doll, he made its own tulpa that kind of lasted for over a century?
I'm going to be completely sincere here. I swear, I do believe that there is something weird going on here, not because of all the stories that people reported about Robert the Doll in the inception of its life, like in the early 1900s. But I think there's something to this whole span of instances going on for years, especially if you look at the case of Myrtle, that woman who bought the house from the aging wife of Eugene, the kid who used to own the doll. So in 1974, as we mentioned earlier, the house was bought by this woman named Myrtle. And she apparently had no idea that this doll was there. She didn't know anything about the history of the family. I imagine in my wildest dreams that Eugene, even though he grew up in a very wealthy family, it sounds like he broke away from the family and went off to was it New York City or something to be an artist, right? So yeah. I don't know. Okay. I don't know what level of success he had as an artist. It sounds like he had some mild success, if not getting some kind of inheritance, because he had a little bit of money to sustain his life. But he eventually passed away, was still married to his wife, who survived him, and she ended up selling the house to somebody. So there might have been some financial struggle there. Like, why not just rent the house? Why not keep it in the family? They needed to sell it for whatever reason. but it sounds like the woman who bought it, Myrtle, this woman Myrtle, did not know their backstory. So that, to me, that is the nexus of the story. As I said earlier, that there's something strange going on where you have someone reporting paranormal activity associated with the doll that did not have any knowledge of the backstory. That it seems like it anyway. And then she ended up finding the doll walled up in the attic of this old home. So not just that, right? Even if you want to argue that people came back to this original story of Gene owning the doll, and there being reports of all these strange occurrences happening when he was a kid, like the child or the doll walking back and forth between the windows, and people hearing grimacing laughs and whatnot. If you put that aside, you still have people who probably didn't hear that original story between 1974 and 1994 when the doll was sent to a museum. I think that adds a decent amount of credibility to this story. And if you were to ask me in my wildest dreams, my wildest guess, I think what's happening here is what you mentioned earlier. I think you're spot on. I think that this was a normal doll. And I think that there was something already building or mounting in Gene as a kid. Whether it was a separate entity in the house and he was just trying to make friends with it and it warmed up to him, or he created himself as a tulpa. But something got put into this doll. And I think the craziest, creepiest thing I can imagine is that Gene, after he passed away, ended up inhabiting the doll itself because he was so obsessed with it. It was just that one thing he could not let go of. And I think a lot of us have that experience in life where, like, for some reason, we just have something where we ruminate on. We just cannot let it go for some reason. So maybe he just paid way too much attention beyond what's normal and ended up putting part or all of his spirit in this doll that is still there to this day. And that actually, to me, is more terrifying than the idea that the doll is acting on its own accord by itself. It's way scarier for me to think that somebody put their soul in their doll unintentionally because they were so obsessed with it. But unfortunately, I think it sounds like that if there was anything ever happening in this situation, it would be that. What do you think about this situation?
I'm going to go down the route of, I think there's some sort of attachment to the doll. I think there was something around Gene that was interacting with Gene when he was younger. And when Gene got that doll from his grandfather, or if he got the doll from the former worker that was mistreated, either way, I think Gene already was interacting with someone, because to me, I think he might have had a lonely upbringing, especially with older siblings, if they were way older than him, or if he wasn't really given the attention that a kid needs, and he kind of or got that attention from elsewhere. It may have been some sort of entity that when he finally got the doll, it occupied it as a vessel and has been there ever since. And that's probably why it had such a strong hold on him growing up and even as an adult. But that's what I think, man.
The one last thing I want to mention to people listening, that it's just a minor thing. I wanted to mention it earlier. You can cut this out if you want, but you were mentioning dolls that don't have faces. And that is apparently something that a lot of people find creepy based off of, the story you were telling earlier. And what's news to me is that people actually, like, a lot of people actually find faceless dolls as creepy as I did, because my mom tells me this story, and I thought that I was weird for being like this as a kid. But my mom said that when I was like 3 or 4 years old, or maybe even younger, like maybe 3 to 4, somewhere around there, or sorry, 2 to 3, she said that I would see dolls that they were called Amish dolls. So I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, where you live now, Chris, but like we very much, Pennsylvania very much has like a lot of Amish culture and a lot of that old style Lancastrian, or if that's the right way to say it, but like old Dutch kind of belief system or whatever. So people came over from Germany and Switzerland and stuff like that. But like essentially, people used to create these dolls that were faceless, right? And I think that the crux of it was in Christian culture. for people who were associated to those belief structures, there was something kind of evil about putting a face on a doll. Like, you didn't want to create like this sense of beauty or attachment, right? So like they didn't want to have kids grow up to be coveting like looks and stuff like that. So they made these dolls faceless, which is understandable. That sounds kind of noble, right? Like, you don't want your kid to grow up to be like overly infatuated with their looks, because that could ruin their lives or whatever. They could be focused too much on the now instead of progressing their lives for the positive. But anyway, apparently, I would see these faceless dolls as a child, and I would just scream my head off. I would just cry. I don't know if you have similar stories, but like that's the last thing I wanted to say about this is there's something to humans creating dolls that inherently create fear. Whether or not it's intentional, I don't know deep down. But here you go. Here's another example of, like, from my case, from my story, there is a doll that's created where I'm projecting some kind of feeling to it, which is fear, because it doesn't have a face. And I imagine the same is with the story you're telling, where, you know, Eugene gets this toy doll that is filling a gap for him, that is loneliness and people not paying attention to him, and just lack of enthusiasm altogether for a familial, like, family structure. So he puts this energy on this doll that ends up being different than fear. It ends up giving it power. So that, I think that is something that you could really, like, put the hook, line, and sinker in for adding credibility to this story.
If you go to see Robert the Doll, don't insult him. Don't do anything mean, because it's not worth the risk. And also, if we offended you in any way, we are sorry, Robert.
We're sorry.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. You can find us on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and share. Also, don't forget to give a follow on Instagram at twroadpodcast and follow my TikTok at twrpodcast. Take care, and I'll catch you on the next one.